Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Prime Minister has announced plans to cut the UK's carbon emissions to almost zero over the next 30 years to help tackle climate change. It would mean, among other things, millions of people switching from petrol and diesel cars to electric vehicles and taking fewer flights. If the plans are passed, Britain would become the first major economy to adopt such a legally binding target. The move has been widely praised by Green campaigners, but some fear it's already too late and an impossible task. Here's our science editor, David Shukman.
This is a huge moment in the effort to tackle climate change. A radical vision to shut off the gases that are raising temperatures. No more sights like this of exhaust fumes pouring into the air. And no more gas burning in our homes for cooking or for heating.
These are the men, and here is the metal.
The country that led the Industrial Revolution got rich with the help of coal, but using it released carbon dioxide that's still in the atmosphere. And adding no more of it is one of the Prime Minister's final moves in office.
Well, I believe that we have a moral duty to leave this world in a better condition than what we inherited. And that's why today we're announcing that we will be ending our contribution to climate change by 2050 and legislating for a net zero emissions target.
So what is a net zero target? Well, it means running the economy without adding to levels of greenhouse gases. Offshore wind turbines are key to that, and there'll be a lot more of them. And it also means making big changes in our everyday lives, like in this eco house. First off, triple glazed windows and walls that are incredibly thick and well insulated. Amazingly, this place has no central heating at all. Instead, the natural warmth of the room is drawn off through these extractors, taken into this device, where it's used to heat up fresh, cooler air from outside, which is then warmed up and released through this pipe up here. The result, a temperature of 21 degrees for virtually no power, and with technologies that are available right now. What about the cost of all this? If we're all going to switch to electric cars, for example, who pays for the chargers? The Treasury is worried that the bills will mount up. Supporters say cleaning the air will benefit everyone and reduce costs for the NHS. But one of the teenage school protesters says everything's too slow.
2050 is far too late, unfortunately. We urgently need to actually take immediate action rather than having this over the course of nearly 30 years.
So what's the international view of Britain's action? Well, China is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, dwarfing whatever we produce. But it's also investing the most in clean technologies, with the world's biggest fleets of electric buses. Even so, the Chinese economy and others are set to quadruple in size. So whatever we do may not make much difference.
Global warming and addressing global warming is overwhelmingly about how do you deal with 4 Chinas, 4 Indias, 4 Africas within 30 years, and another 1.5 billion people as well.
A map of global warming. Despite every effort, temperatures keep rising around the world, with the risk of the impact becoming more severe. Britain hopes that taking a lead will set an example that others will follow. David Shukman, BBC News.
Meanwhile, the outgoing Prime Minister has been setting out what she hopes will be part of her legacy. Theresa May unveiled plans that she says could safeguard the environment for generations to come. The government is to set a legally binding target of net zero emissions by 2020, the first major economy to do so. That will mean major changes for all of us, such as scrapping diesel and petrol cars for electric and taking more journeys by bike or by foot. We'll need to eat less meat and dairy and instead eat more vegetables and pulses. And we'll need to commit to a much bigger use of green energy using more renewables, such as wind turbines and solar panels. Well, our science editor Tom Clark reports now from South Wales on the price of change for both the environment and people.
Today could become a milestone in human industrial history, not just here in South Wales, but globally. Britain becoming the first major economy to turn its back on fossil fuels.
I believe that we have a moral duty to leave this world in a better condition than we inherited. And that's why today we're announcing that we will be ending our contribution to climate change by 2050.
Net zero is technically feasible, but is it politically acceptable? The Pennycomoedd wind farm is the largest in England and Wales, and one of the last to be built because of opposition to onshore wind. Net zero means nothing at all without immediate policies to back it up.
Firstly, bringing forward the technologies we already have, backing things like onshore wind, backing energy efficiency in people's homes, pushing electrification of transport.
And it might just happen. Net zero has cross-party support because it can bring jobs and opportunity. Effectively, what we're talking about is a new industrial revolution, a massive transition away from fossil fuels to new ways of generating power, new transportation methods, new forms of manufacturing. But what if the green revolution leaves communities behind? Below the wind farm lies the Rhondda Valley. After the collieries closed, it became one of the most deprived areas in Europe.
The whole feel of the togetherness that the collieries brought as an industry, with all the activities that went around the collieries, a lot of that was lost overnight. So social connections were lost, and yeah, very difficult times for people.
Kerry Nicholas now runs a community forest, encouraging new business opportunities from the valley's woodlands.
Yeah, I think the lesson to be learned is that you need to work with communities and work in partnerships. We've brought together a strategic partnership of over 40 organisations to try and work together to have a common goal and a common understanding of the community's needs going into the future.
How can we reduce our carbon footprints?
These local children will be nearly 40 when the net zero target must be met.
We use solar panels, we use taps that turn off over a certain amount of time.
You can ride your bike to school or walk, and it'll be using less fossil fuels.
They clearly know what has to happen to prevent climate change damaging their future, but is it something the grown-ups in Westminster can deliver? Tom Clark, ITV News, in the Rhondda Valley.
Less meat to eat, no petrol-powered cars, fewer flights and homes no longer heated with gas boilers. That's what may have to happen now that the Prime Minister has committed the UK to the toughest climate change target of any major economy. Environmental groups have welcomed the tightening of existing legally enshrined targets that will mean our greenhouse gas emissions will be cut to zero by 2050. Minnie Stevenson reports.
The time is now, say climate change campaigners, but not quite yet, says the government. The pressure may now be off Theresa May, but she's determined to leave a legacy. Today announcing the UK would cut greenhouse emissions to zero by 2050.
Well, I believe that we have a moral duty to leave this world in a better condition than what we inherited. And that's why today we're announcing that we will be ending our contribution to climate change by 2050 and legislating for a net zero emissions target.
While some welcome that news, many leading environmentalists say the target's too far away, criticising the government's chronic inaction on climate change.
The UK can and must go faster, and we must see some radical changes in policy straight away, because we're not even meeting the carbon targets we have now.
But does government rhetoric match reality? Some think not. Only last month, Parliament declared a climate emergency.
It is a crisis. It is a threat.
But this government's decision to expand Heathrow under Theresa May's premiership doesn't quite marry up to their mission to eliminate carbon emissions. And this October, they'll impose VAT on some solar panel projects. So what will a zero emissions future look like? Well, beef consumption might need to fall by 90%. Meat production is a big contributor to greenhouse gases. Around 38 million petrol and diesel vehicles will be removed from the roads, replaced by electric alternatives. Airline flights will have to be drastically reduced or new fuels introduced. And gas boilers in 25 million homes will have to go, replaced with low-carbon heating. Welcome to the future, perhaps. Introducing the Passive House in the middle of our street, a low-emissions home which is instead heated by 2 electric towel rails.
Now, while it feels very warm in here, I can tell you that this house actually has no central heating. And this is the crucial thing. Because it's an airtight space, The makers say it's so insulated that it actually uses up around 90% less energy than existing UK buildings.
Big in Belgium, but currently there are just over 1,000 in the UK. This architect believes every home could be like this.
Has Britain been a little bit slow on the uptake here?
There is a reluctance from the construction industry to change, right? It's because money is invested, methods are tested, and we say we know what we're doing. But actually, in this house I used different construction techniques, yes, but they were not revolutionary. What you need to achieve is a house that conserves its energy, so it has a nice woolly jumper or a duvet around it.
While the scientists of the future met a soon-to-be Prime Minister of the past for this photo op, the Extinction Rebellion protesters were unimpressed, saying Theresa May's 2050 target is too late, calling it a death sentence for the planet.
Well, joining me in the studio now is Farhana Yameen, international environmental lawyer. She was arrested in April after gluing herself to the ground outside Shell's London HQ as part of the Extinction Rebellion protest. Thanks very much for coming in. Is this job done? Does this mean Extinction Rebellion is itself
Not
extinct?
at all, not at all. We have far too many inconsistent policies. We're already behind with the existing targets that the UK had set itself. And we're expanding, fossil fuel infrastructure and lifestyle. So by all means, this is a welcome first step, but it's really inadequate and it's come quite late.
The government enshrining in law this net zero target, the first major nation to propose this target. Why isn't this good enough?
It is very welcome. I'm not saying that we should not be proud of the fact that, we've got legislation about to go on the books, but this target does need to be backed by action, and I'm afraid that the track record of the UK isn't all that it should be, and we've still got far too many inconsistent policies on the statute book at the moment.
You talk about being backed by action, and we saw in Minnie's report there really significant changes that people in essence will be forced to make if this is to work. So if people are forced to eat less meat or fly less, what about their rights to, their free will, essentially?
Well, they'll be forced to be healthier. They'll be forced to breathe in air that's cleaner.
But it's their choice to eat meat,
they'll be forced to pay electricity bills that are far cheaper. So I think sometimes when we're looking at this in terms of rights, we're forgetting that actually the shift to a cleaner, greener economy is far healthier and is going to cost the nation much less.
Well, you talk about costs there, and of course the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has warned that this could cost £1 trillion, and that money inevitably would have to come out of education or health. I mean, how do you feel about that claim?
It's preposterous. He obviously didn't read the report fully because he did not take into account all the benefits and all the costs of inaction. So, Theresa May was right to rebuke him, and, that estimate coming out and being bandied around is one of the key reasons why rebellion needs to happen, because people are mistaking the fact that inaction does have costs. 1% of our GDP, I have been representing small island states who've been losing 3, 4, 5% of their GDP as a result of climate-related inaction.
I mean, you talk about infrastructure. There's no mention so far of Heathrow and the future of Heathrow. What do you think has to happen now?
I think people have to start having this difficult conversation. Obviously, many of the things that we were thinking were compatible with, the 80% reduction targets are absolutely not compatible with going to zero. And we have to stop kidding ourselves that we don't need changes in the way we live our lives.
So there was talk of another protest at Heathrow in the coming days. Is that off now?
It's still under discussion, but I think what is important is that, people are very frustrated. People are willing to keep on protesting. People are thinking
and many people are frustrated by your protests.
I think the mood of the country has really shifted, and around 2/3 of people now agree that we're in a climate emergency and want action to be taken.
Farhana Yameen, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you.